All right. So this week we're going to continue our exploration, if you will, of working inside of After Effects. Last week we had a nice little soft introduction to our workflow, but the one thing that we really didn't spend any time talking about last week was how to animate inside of After Effects. So it's really kind of more of an I/O day, an input-output. How do we get some stuff in, then how do we get it out? Well, today I really want to start driving into the animation inside of After Effects because that's really what it's purpose-built for. A second ago, we were talking about niche applications, right? Well, After Effects is purpose-built for computer animation. It's designed from the ground up to really support that workflow. So I wanted to spend some time today talking about how we're going to be able to do some basic, simple level animations inside of After Effects. Our homework assignment this week is going to start to blend our workflows a little bit. So if we go into the Week 9 module on Canvas, let's check it out. Here it is. Dun, 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 dun. You're going to be doing a sneak animation. More on the details of the sneak here in a minute, but the big picture goal and where we're really kind of headed here is that we want to draw some animation frames in Photoshop or in Animate, and then bring those animation frames over into After Effects so that we now can start adding a simple little moving background into the mix, okay? Because we want to animate our backgrounds in After Effects this week, or that's the goal, okay? So at the conclusion of our conversation today, we're really going to have a good, solid understanding of how to create shapes inside of After Effects, because we don't need to create all of our artwork in something like Photoshop or Illustrator or Animate. We can actually create a whole bunch of stuff right here in After Effects, which is pretty cool. And then we're going to animate those shapes here inside of After Effects. What After Effects does very poorly is character animation, okay? Everything else it excels in. It's actually kind of top shelf. There are some character animation tools, and we'll play around with the puppet tools and the push pin tools to make some very simple kind of hokey things that look like this, okay? That's kind of purpose-built for the character animation crowd. But we're really going to start exploring how we can do backgrounds this week, okay? And then we'll advance onto some other fun stuff as we go through the semester, okay? Now, this time of year, I like to show a small, very, very short video, and I probably should stop the live stream for this. Hold on a second. I forgot to open the door. All right, so I want to show a very quick, short video that acts as a perfect kind of setup, context, as to why we choose to animate inside of After Effects, especially when it comes to background elements, okay? Like most things in the animation world, the underpinnings of our digital technology actually comes from the analog world, from the old school animation industry. And let me show you something real fast. I'm going to just pause. I'm not even going to pause the live stream, but I am So did you guys like that video? That's a pretty cool video, right? I always love seeing the old school ways of producing all these wonderful, wonderful visual effect shots and animations. I've gone ahead and launched After Effects because I really want us to spend some time looking at how we can start to work with the animation engine inside of After Effects and produce something that is, that's going to serve our larger purposes over the next couple of weeks. Now we have two things that we're going to be striving to accomplish this week. We have the sneak animation. We also have a redo, if you will, of an animation that we've already done this semester, and that's the bouncing ball. I want to ask you guys to do the bouncing ball animation one more time, but this time we're going to use exclusively the animation tool set that we find over in After Effects. Okay? So let's just jump in and take a look-see. I want to turn a light off real fast. The application color in After Effects is almost pure black. Does anyone know off the top of their heads why most of our professional apps have very, very dark interfaces? It's probably just emo or something. No, it's not that we're all feeling generally horrible about ourselves. Huh? Artists are not always sad. I'm an artist and I'm a pretty happy guy, right? No, it's color. It's color reproduction. It's to ensure it's really to ensure that our eyes are interpreting color correctly, right? Because if the application was pink, okay, then our understanding of how pink is influencing our artwork is going to be skewed based off of the surroundings. So it's really all about color reproduction and color spill, okay? So that's why most of the pro apps have these wonderful, wonderful dark interfaces so that we interpret the colors of the artwork correctly and not be influenced by the colors of the application, okay? So last week when we were starting to work inside of After Effects, one of the things that we very, very quickly realized is that we need to create something similar to our stage over in Animate. Does anyone remember what that item is called? Yeah, composition. So we're going to need to create a composition, okay? And I have lost the battery pack for my laptop. Give me 2 seconds. My battery on my laptop is about to die. Many apologies. Okay, so we're going to need to create a composition. Now, just like we did over inside of Animate, what size is our composition going to be? Something by something, yes. So specifically, it's going to be 1280 by 720. We're trying to create a direct translation of the data that we created over in Animate over here inside of After Effects. So of course we can just simply hit the gigantic button in the middle of our viewer to start a new composition, but we can also do the exact same thing by going up to the top of the screen and choosing new composition. Okay? You'll get this pretty intimidating popover, but really there's only a couple things in here that we need to focus on, specifically the width and height, the frame rate, and of course the duration. So we're going to use 1280 by 720. It's a good place to begin. This is video resolution. The frame rate of our animation is going to be 24, and this is our duration. We don't have a never-ending timeline. Here's my suggestion to you. Keep this pretty short, okay? The default is a 30-second timeline. For most things that we're going to be doing in here, that's way, way too long. Put it at 5 or at 10. That way your timeline's a little bit more controllable. I'm going to leave mine at 5, and then we'll get to work. Now, I really can't recommend enough that you follow along and do this with me. The only way to learn this, and I'm really being honest here, the only way to learn this is to get your hands dirty, to fire open the app and start clicking some switches and knobs, okay? This is a pretty interesting and unique environment. You can't learn this thing, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, by watching me do it or by watching the live stream. The only way to do it is to jump in and to physically start pressing some buttons. So launch the app. I'm going to build some very simple shapes here in a second that will allow us to start exploring how the animation engine actually works, okay? While y'all's apps are launching here, one small thing, I want to change the name of my composition Does anyone remember where I can go inside the interface to change the name of a composition, or just maybe to change the settings? Right-click. Let's see what happens when we right-click. Composition settings. Yep, that works. That's a great way of doing it. If you're not working over inside of the project bin, of course, the composition pull-down menu at the top of the screen will give you access to that exact same environment. So Command-K, that's a good one to commit to memory. It's going to bring to the surface all of your basic composition settings. So I want to change the name. I'm going to walk away from Comp1. That's just kind of bad. It's just kind of bad form. We don't want it to be Comp1. If any of you guys turn in an assignment called Comp1, I'm going to fail you, right? No, I'm not going to fail you. But we want to be specific. We want to bring to the surface the contents of this animation. And I'm just going to call this Pat's Silly Animation. Go, and we'll hit OK. The larger point being is that we can change any of our composition settings at any time. It's not written in stone. We're not locked down. If we start changing like the frame size and the frame rate or the duration, we may need to go back in and recompose some of our assets and reanimate things, but we can do that. All right, so now that I got a really great composition here, we need to start filling it with some assets. Last week we spent some time looking at how we can import in some animation frames into Animate or into After Effects from Animate. Well, this week we're going to do almost all of our work with assets that we build inside of After Effects. Now there's two important large ideas that we need to focus on when understanding which type of asset that we want to work with. The first is having a good understanding of the difference between a rasterized bitmap image and a vector image. What's the difference between the two? A bitmap image and a vector image. Does anyone know the difference? Yeah. I love it. Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. I'm sorry, say again? You got it. An SVG, that's a vector image. Okay. Just write on the board here real fast some of the differences between them, because I think you'll start to understand very directly that there is pros and cons, benefits from both. Okay. Okay. So let's start off by looking at just the good old-fashioned bitmap, right? Been around forever. Here comes a light. Bitmaps, okay? Been around forever, nothing new, okay? The kind of an old-school image format that goes all the way back to the dawn of our workflow, a bitmap, okay? Now, if a Martian landed today and asked what in the world a bitmap is, how would you describe it? I love it, and you said the right word. They're pixels, right? So bitmaps are pixel-based images, okay? So the next natural question the Martian's going to ask is, what in the world's a pixel? How would you describe it to them? That's it. It's just a square or a rectangle of color. Specifically, a bitmap, and I'm going to keep this pretty basic, by the way, okay? A bitmap image is a whole grid of these little rectangles stacked on top of each other. I'll keep it pretty simple. Okay. How many colors can a pixel be? One. Okay. So in a simple grid of pixels like I've drawn on the whiteboard here, we'll have to use each colored square to describe a shape. Now, when it comes to the very rudimentary illustrations with just a couple pixels, something that looks like this, okay, I'll do this pretty fast here, with only a couple pixels in tow, this is going to be, believe it or not, with a 25 pixel image. There we go. That is a sphere. Okay? With only a couple pixels, that's the best we can do to draw a sphere. Okay? So the more pixels that we have, the finer the quality of the image is going to be. Right? We'll be able to pick up on a lot of micro detail. How many pixels do we have in a modern day image? Millions of pixels. Millions and millions of pixels, right? Especially when you start working at the cinema resolution. We're probably into 1 billion pixels across an image that size. They're intense, right? But each pixel is only allowed to be one color. This is kind of like the old school way of creating images. Most images that are captured today are going to be bitmaps, right? Everything that you take with a phone or a camera or that you find on the web, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a bitmap image. It's an old school way of working. Now, the benefits of this, really easy to make a bitmap image, right? It's basically an old school mosaic. That's all it really is, okay? So they're incredibly easy to make. The tool sets that's required to edit and work with a bitmap, really kind of rudimentary tools, nothing too fancy there. The unfortunate thing is that once you create the image, the quality of the image is locked to the number of pixels that you have in there, right? You guys have seen this all the time, right? You take a small image that you find on the web, and then you scale it up like 2,000%. What happens to the quality? Yeah, it gets destroyed pretty quickly, because once we create the image at a defined resolution, it's never going to be higher quality than when it's created, okay? It drives me crazy when I watch like television shows like CSI. It's just, it drives me absolutely batty where CSI does it almost on every single episode, right? Well, they have like a crime scene photograph of something, and then some rock star investigator will come to the tech wizard and say, "I want you to blow up this image and enhance it so I can see all the detail in there." And they take a little bitty postage stamp of the image, and then they magnify it, and then it gets like really great quality. That doesn't happen. That's the furthest from that is physically impossible. We can't add pixels into a rasterized bitmap image after it's created. That's Hollywood. Nothing is real and everything is fake. It's kind of what it is, right? So there's some big drawbacks of working with rasterized bitmap images. They are everywhere. Now, in the video sense, especially for us in the animation, the output of everything that we create that's going to end up on a cinema screen or a television screen is going to be a bitmap image, okay? So eventually, everything gets rasterized down into a whole series of pictures. But how we get there, we have some choices, okay? Because the alternative is going to be a vector image. Now, for those of you that have some experience in this, what in the world is a vector image? How would you describe it to an alien that lands on our planet? Because vector images speak the universal language. I apologize for interrupting you, Craig. You got it. You got it. So this is really kind. This is a math-based image, okay? And I want to put next to it path-based, okay? Instead of creating a grid of pixels, okay, we create a whole series of control points, okay? So instead of drawing a circle with these colored squares like I had earlier, with a vector image, I'm going to create a whole series of control points that allow me to basically connect the dots with a path, okay? And I'm going to create a mathematical representation of a circle based on the orientation of the path. And we're going to pretend that's a circle, okay? This is an art class, we can pretend, okay? So math-based representation of a shape, okay? Now, since it's math-based or path-based, how is this an advantage for us as editors and authors? Yeah, it doesn't get pixelated, right? Math scales quite wonderfully, right? We can make anything that's mathematically based scale to an infinite size, and I really don't know. I'm not a mathematician, so I don't know if there's actually a boundary to that size. But point being, with a vector shape image, I can make an image that can go on a business card, and then I can take that exact same image and scale it up so that it fits on the size of a billboard, and it's still going to be 100% quality, right? It's scalable infinitely. You're never going to see those really horrible jagged edges that we're going to see with a bitmap image, okay? In addition, since it's all path-based, okay, by the path determining or being determined by the location of all these control points, I can change these control points' position or even animate their position and continue to refine the shape after I've created it, which makes it incredibly flexible, especially for us as animators, right? Because we always want to be able to change our shapes and animate these shapes, okay? Now, what are the big kind of drawbacks of working with vector images? Because there's some really direct, earth-shaking, attention-grabbing benefits. What are some of the problems that are associated with vector images? Not so much hard to find, because we actually don't have to look too far to find a whole lot of vector images. Our web technology has gotten to the point, the maturity of that technology has gotten to the point where we're now able to produce vector graphics going into a website. When we're working with vector graphics, now we require specialized tools that understand this mathematical kind of image creation system. In addition, managing and creating all of these points can be a little bit difficult from time to time. There's kind of a unique workflow that's more challenging than if we were just working in a pixel-based grid of images. So there are some pros and cons to each. These are pretty easy to work with, okay? But the quality level is something that's always going to be an issue, potentially, for us, okay? These, quality is never an issue, right? Because they're always going to look pixel perfect. But they're a little bit more difficult to use, okay? We're going to look at both of these today and how we can create each of them individually inside of After Effects. And we're going to explore how the After Effects animation and image creation engine kind of what it allows us to do when it comes to both of these image types. And I think you're going to find there's a pretty big, powerful system here in play. All right, let's jump back over into After Effects real fast and take a look at how we can create a rasterized bitmap first. We actually did this last week, okay? When we create a new solid layer, what we're actually creating is a rasterized bitmap image. And you see this very directly inside the command itself. So if we go to the top of the screen, under Layer, oops, I don't have my composition selected, I'm sorry. There we go. Now, Layer, gotta have this bottom one, the timeline selected. There we go, I'm sorry. Layer, New, Solid. These solid layers are absolutely rasterized bitmap images. They're just grids of pixels. We see this very directly when we click on the command and look at the size parameters, okay? Because now we have a width and a height. In every sense, we are determining the pixel resolution of this layer. It's never going to look better than the quality that we initially set here, okay? So I'm just going to leave mine at 200 by 200. And I want to make the color downstairs just blue because I like blue, okay? So let's hit cancel. Just Layer, New, Solid. And I'm going to call this blue box. And there it is. Dun, 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 dun. All right. There's my groovy little blue box just hanging out inside the middle of my stage. Now, I want to get this thing to move, okay? I'm going to create the world's best animation here, and simply our cube is going to move from the left side of the screen all the way over to the right side of the screen. Just like, I know, mind blown, give me the Academy Award right now, right? But through this very simple animation, we're going to learn the basics of the After Effects animation engine, because it's a little bit weird. It's different, okay? So let's go ahead and get started with it. Now, when working with solids, any sort of manipulation we do with the direct selection tool can immediately be seen inside of our composition. So I can grab this solid, I can move it around and change its position. I can even grab the edges here and change the size and the scale of this if I'd like. Okay? So we can start to transform and place our object wherever we want. Just to make it easier, I'm going to put it in the lower left-hand corner of my composition so you guys can see what's coming up next. Okay, now I want to animate the position of this cube going across my scene. And in After Effects, we have to tell the computer very directly which animation channel to start generating some keyframes for. Now we find access to all these animation channels through this little disclosure arrow right here. So if you click on the little white arrow next to the layer name, you're going to expand it and start to explore all the different animation channels that are accessible on this particular layer. There it is. So here's all of our transform items. And if we expand that disclosure arrow one more time, there they all are, the 5 basic animation channels that are associated with every single layer. Now I want to help Seth out because he just did something that all of us are going to do from one time or another. And he double-clicked on his layer, okay? Yeah, it's something that happens. It's going to take some removal of some muscle memory to get out of that workflow, okay? Because there's 2 things in here that we need to manage, and I apologize, I'm just going to step backwards in time for a second. what Seth did is that he double-clicked on that layer, thinking, to no fault of your own, Seth, because you're new at this, thinking that that was probably going to open up the layer. That's the natural convention. We see this with folders inside of our Explorer, inside of our Finder. You double-click on a folder, it opens the folder. We want to look inside of our layer, so naturally you think, oh, I'm going to double-click on the layer. But in After Effects, when you double-click on a layer, what it does is it opens up this asset in its own viewer. Okay? Now, this is something that will become more interesting for us when we're working with video clips. For a simple square, it's just going to be a big blue square in the viewer. So we'll come back to this idea a little bit later on in this semester. However, getting back to our timeline, because this is where people start to get confused, and I saw Seth beginning to do this. He was like, where's my timeline? I'm clicking down here, and what's going on, right? Well, check it out. Our viewer up here starts to give us the little breadcrumbs to that back to the root, okay, back to the actual composition itself. If the developers down at Adobe were listening, they should return to this convention, because these are actually two different tabs. It doesn't read as two different tabs. In previous iterations of the interface, they were actually like visible tabs. Now I guess we're just supposed to know that they're tabs, I guess, all right? So now we're in the Layer Viewer tab. But simply, if we just clicked on the Composition Viewer tab, now we're back to our timeline, okay? You can close this if you'd like, okay? So now we're back, okay? So try real hard, and this is a muscle memory that it's going to take some practice kind of breaking. Don't double-click on anything inside of After Effects, okay? Everything is opened and closed by these little handy-dandy disclosure arrows, okay? So here are the 5 basic animation channels that come with every single layer. These are universal. It doesn't matter if you're animating a clip, like a video clip, a photograph, a shape layer, some text. These 5 animation channels are going to be on every single layer type inside of After Effects, okay? So the anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity, which is really just a fancy word for what? Opacity. Yeah, you got it. The see-throughness. It's not a word, right? It's transparency, yeah. It's just the transparency of it, okay? So I want to animate my cube going from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. Now we have to be kind of disciplined in our application of the After Effects animation process. And there's really kind of 3 important steps that we need to follow when animating anything inside of After Effects, okay? So step numero uno, okay? The first step is to park your playhead in your timeline when you want the animation to begin. So my playhead is way off in the middle of my timeline. I want my animation to begin at the first frame, so I need to park my playhead when I want my animation to begin. Whoops. So it's way over here. I want my animation to begin on the first frame of our animation. So that's step number 1. And you can also left-click and drag on your playhead, just like we can over in Animate, okay, to advance your playhead forward and backwards with inside our timeline. So step number 2, I said there's 3 steps. I apologize. There's 4 steps, okay? Step number 2, okay, once we've parked the playhead where we want our animation to begin, the second thing is to tell the animation engine which one of these channels to start collecting keyframes on. If you look at the Adobe documentation and out there on the internet, you'll often hear people say arming the channel for animation, which is really just a fancy technical term for just clicking on the stopwatch, okay? So we got to tell After Effects which channel to start collecting keyframes on by clicking on this gigantic stopwatch. Now the moment you click on the stopwatch, I'm going to move my playhead out of the way. Check it out. We've created this thing. What does that little diamond mean? It's a keyframe. You got it, okay? This is the After Effects, or really it's kind of the Adobe convention for communicating a keyframe, okay? So I had someone tell me, I think last semester, the semester before, it's like, oh, Photoshop has these. They got this from Photoshop. And it's like, no, it's the other way around. Photoshop stole this from After Effects, because After Effects goes all the way back to the early 90s. Believe it or not, you didn't used to be able to do video editing, nor should you do video editing inside of Photoshop, right? So these little diamonds are keyframes. Now, what in the world is a keyframe in the sense of in the grand sense of computer animation? You got it. So in our kind of classical sense, it's just a drawing, right, of an extreme pose, a storytelling moment. For us as classic 2D animators, we've been doing this since literally day one in this course, right? We've been focusing a lot of energy on the creation of our keyframes. But in the computer animation sense, these keyframes is just information, okay? We're telling the computer that this object needs to be at this position at this time, okay? I always like to imagine these keyframes kind of like those little plastic Easter eggs that you see, right? The ones that you can pop open in half. But instead of there being a delicious Hershey Kiss or something on the inside, there's data, okay? All that's inside and all that's being saved in these keyframes is these sets of numbers. That's it, okay? We're telling the computer that this layer at this time needs to be this data, okay? It's all a keyframe is. Just, we've saved some information inside one of those diamonds, okay? Now, for us, keyframes come in pairs, okay? If I want my object to move from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, I need to create a second keyframe, and then the computer is going to interpolate between them. The computer is going to do the heavy lifting for us. That's kind of the big benefit of doing computer-based animation is we set the keyframes, and the computer draws all the in-between frames for us, okay? So the third step in our animation pipeline is to physically advance the playhead forward, okay? Physically advance it forward. This is the step that most people forget, okay? Once our playhead is forward, now we can finalize our animation and complete the fourth step of the animation pipeline, and that's just changing the values, okay? Changing the values of the data channel that we're keyframing, okay? Specifically, and there's two ways you can do this specifically. You could do it numerically. These are sliders, okay? You could do that, which is absolutely fine. I just left-clicked and dragged on the numbers. Or you can just do it visually by clicking on it and dragging it up in your timeline, up in your viewer, okay? Aha, wonderful. Mission accomplished. If you see a little motion path, a little dotted line inside of your composition viewer, that means you've done it. I can see how After Effects automatically creates that second keyframe for us. We have an auto keying system, so all we need to do initially is to turn on that stopwatch, and then After Effects is going to key everything that we do after it automatically for us. We can turn it off if we want to, but generally speaking, it's a good thing to have on. It kind of saves us some energy and a whole lot of clicks inside the interface. So keyframes come in pairs. We have to have at least 2 keyframes for our computer to interpolate between them. So if I hit the space bar, there it is. I know. Pretty stellar animation, right? Just goes from the left side to the right side over and over and over again. Okay? Pretty cool, huh? Pretty neat. Pretty straightforward. Now let's talk about these keyframes for a second. I'm going to go back to the first frame and select my blue cube. And we can very easily see that motion path inside of our composition viewer. I'm going to do this just so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay. So I like the distance that my little cube is traveling, but man, I want it to take maybe I don't want it to take a full second to go from its start to its stop location. How am I going to change the speed of this animation? Do I need to start over? No, right? This is the cool thing about working in the computer, right? We don't have to start over. We don't have to redraw any of this, right? Now we just have to change the location of our keyframes. So if I wanted my animation to be faster, what would I need to do to the location of my keyframes? Yeah, we're going to move them closer. Phew, great job. That's exactly what you would have said. We're going to move them closer. So here's my keyframe here at a second. So if I put my playhead at frame 12, I can grab that keyframe and move it closer to the first. Now if you noticed very carefully here, the start and stop locations for my cube did not change, but now the computer has fewer frames to move my object, so the illusion that we create is a faster movement. Yeah?
Where are the scrolling arrows to be able to just navigate through right here?
So, a couple things. The question was, I can see on Bronco's, his composition is kind of way up in the upper right-hand corner of his viewer. So a couple things to look at. Down here, this little percentage sign, if you put it to fit, that's a good place to begin. Okay. In addition, if you want to adjust the location of your composition in the viewer, holding down the space bar will activate this little hand grabber tool, and you can change what you see. You're not actually changing the location of your composition. You're not changing the frame size or frame width. Imagine that your composition viewer is this never-ending infinite gray box, and you have a little postage stamp inside that little infinite box. Okay? We're just changing the location of that little postage stamp. What you see, let me zoom out, no matter where you've put your window here, whatever's inside of this block frame will always be the contents that's exported out. So this is very much like Animate. Of what you see is what you get. If you don't see it inside of your composition, it's not going to get exported out. After Effects does a little bit better job of communicating that idea to us rather than Animate. Because in Animate, you could draw a character off your stage. You can completely use your pen tool. You can draw completely off your stage. You can color it off your stage, and it will always be off your stage, right? Here in After Effects, you just see a very faint line of the outline of the entire layer. Okay, so you'll see pretty directly what that looks like. All right. So we absolutely can move our keyframes around inside of our composition to continue to craft the timing of the animation that we're after, right? Maybe I want my animation to be slower, so spread the keyframes out will allow me to move slower now. Same movement, the start and stop location, so in every sense the contents of my keyframes aren't changing. Just how long the computer has to transition between them is the thing that's being updated. Now inversely, what if I wanted to go back and change the location of these keyframes, right? What if I really want, maybe my animation supervisor comes in and says, Pat, this is a really stupid animation, and you need to do something a little bit better. I can go, no problem, right? And he says, you know what would be better? How about the cube starts in the lower left-hand corner and ends in the upper right-hand corner, right? Well, I could certainly go down and numerically figure out those locations, or I can look very directly at the motion path, okay? What are these little dotted dots on the motion path a representation of? Yeah, those are the in-betweens, and specifically those are the frames, right? Since our keyframes are pretty spaced apart, there's a lot of frames in between those keyframes. Watch the concentration of these dots on the line when I compress the location of my keyframes inside of my timeline. My second keyframe is way over here at 2 seconds. Watch the dots when I move it to 1 second. See how there are now fewer of them? The dots on the line are a direct visualization of the number of frames in between the keyframes. Okay? Inversely, what are these cubes at the end? They're the keyframes. Isn't that cool? The direct visualization of the keyframe. So if I want to select, or if I want to change the start location of this keyframe, I don't even have to select it. Okay? Well, in clicking on it, you'll absolutely select it, but I can grab this second keyframe and just change its visual location inside of the composition and completely begin to update and craft my animation visually inside the timeline. Now, if you look very carefully down inside of my timeline itself, the location of my keyframes in time aren't changing, but the data trapped inside that little breakable Easter egg is what's updating visually inside of our composition viewer. Cool, huh? So it's a little bit more of an organic authoring environment. Allows us to prototype things pretty quickly. If I play my animation, this is what we got. Now it just moves in a diagonal line. Here, I want to make the work area just slightly past 2 seconds, so I don't have to wait 2.5 seconds for it to cycle. There we go. All right. Cool, huh? Let's stop the animation again and examine some other details of this great little dotted line. Look carefully at that dotted line for a moment, okay? Because there are a couple dots on here, 2 in particular, that are of much larger shape and size than the others. What are those? Yeah, they're tangent handles for the keyframe's motion path. Check this out. This is how easy it is for us to create arcs of animation inside of After Effects. See how this dot right here is much larger than its neighbors? It's a little deceiving, and I get it, okay? But if I left-clicked and dragged on that dot, it's actually a tangent handle, okay? And now we can create very complex movement arcs inside of our composition viewer just by adjusting the tangent handles for my animation, okay? That's pretty neat. That would historically be a really difficult motion path to create by hand with a whole bunch of keyframes. But thanks to the tangent handles of our motion paths, we can create a very complex animation and movement very quickly. Okay? So use those tangent handles. They're a great way for us to create arcs. And as classic animators, this is a principle of animation that we want to infuse in every single animation that we create. Because as you guys are well aware of, nothing in our world moves in a straight line. Right? Pretty cool. Pretty neat. I tell you what, I've been going for almost 2 hours. Now is an excellent, excellent time for a small little break. So back at 3 o'clock, please. Okay. So before the break, we were just looking at the basic process of keyframing something, but I want to extend it a little bit. Okay. So here's the goal. I want to have my simple little animation. Let me just hit the play button so we can see where we are. Woo! There it goes. But now I want to have it stop in the middle. Okay. So I want it to go from the first location, and then right about here in the middle of my arc, I want it to pause for a second or two, and then continue on to the end. Okay. Now keyframes come in pairs. Okay. If we can break down our movements into a whole series of small little chunks, it then becomes pretty easy to make a complex animation from very, very simple movements. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I want to put my playhead until my blue cube is just visually kind of right there in the middle of the motion path. Okay? And I want to capture that location in a keyframe. Okay? Now earlier when we were adding keyframes and creating keyframes, we were just doing it by moving things around and hitting the stopwatch. Okay? But now I want to create a new keyframe from the current location or at the current location of our timeline. And that's where this little diamond button comes in over here. This is going to create a keyframe at this value at the location of our playhead. Okay? So let's just do it real fast. Let's create a keyframe, and there it is. Okay? So what I've done here is I basically have saved this visual location in that keyframe. Now, if I want it to stay, at the moment it doesn't stay, it doesn't pause, right? It just kind of keeps doing what it's doing. Now, what would I need to do if I wanted to keep it in that middle pose for a second or two? Yeah, we're going to expand the keyframes a little bit. Great guess, okay? We need to have two of these keyframes. We need to have a duplicate of this one in here, okay? Because if we have two keyframes that are identical, the computer has nothing to transition into, right? So one of the cool things about working inside of After Effects is that we absolutely can duplicate our keyframes. We don't need to manually write things down or generate a new one by hitting that little diamond button, okay? We can simply select the keyframe, and when it's blue, that means it's selected, and then Command-C to copy, and then I want to place the playhead somewhere else, just somewhere in the future, and then use Command-V, V as in Victor, to paste a duplicate keyframe on my timeline. Now I have two keyframes that are identical, and we're going to get something that's kind of weird. Generally works, it kind of does this bobble. Now we're getting that bobble because each one of those keyframes has tangent handles in there a little bit. Each one of the keyframes is producing a very small Bezier curve. Here's what I want to do to eliminate that little bobble on that center keyframe. I want to select both of those keyframes there. Not all of them, just the two that kind of produce that little whoopsie. And I want to change their interpolation type. And we do that by right-clicking on the keyframe. And we're going to go down into keyframe interpolation. And we're going to choose under the spatial interpolation. So this is spatial is like position interpolation. We're going to change it from continuous Bezier, which produces those tangent handles, to produce our arcs. We're going to change it to linear, which is going to remove those tangent handles. And in this case, it's going to give us the result that we're after. Okay? And the visual result being it goes, bloop, stops, and then it keeps going. Okay? So copying and pasting keyframes is wicked easy. If I wanted to have the pause in the center be a whole lot longer, I don't need to rekey it. I can just space them out and continue to adjust the animation however it is that I see fit. So let's take a look at it now. Starts at the bottom, pauses, and then continues up. So copying and pasting keyframes is really, really, really easy. Okay? Command-C to copy, Command-V to paste, and then more than likely you have to change the interpolation to remove some of those bobbles. Those tangent handles are a blessing, but sometimes, especially in the context of what we're doing, we want to strip them out under the keyframe interpolation section. Okay? All right. Okay. That's pretty cool, right? I love it. All right. Yeah. So these here in the middle, they're just standard keyframes, nothing fancy. What I was doing is just, let me go back in time. So what I was trying to capture is I wanted my movement to pause in the middle here. So I put my shape in the middle of my motion path, and then this button right here will create a keyframe at the location of our playhead. It's basically going to take whatever values in the channel, places it at a keyframe, and then places that keyframe at the location of our playhead. There we go.
And are the hotkeys the same as this one?
I'm sure there are. Admittedly, I'm not Mr. Hotkey guy. So I know that there is. I just don't know them off the top of my head. I'll be honest with you. I do most of my work with a Wacom tablet, with a Cintiq, or so I'm not having a keyboard, a full keyboard right in front of me is rare, because I'm a Wacom pen guy myself. Okay, anyways, so I'm going to copy that keyframe, Command C, and then Command V to paste it in. And now it's gonna get this weird little bobble. That's because of the Bezier handles on the inside. It still has the same Bezier handles that we have like over here, okay? But we can strip those out by selecting the two keyframes that we want to edit, right-click. Oops, I didn't right-click on the keyframe. There we go. And under the keyframe interpolation section, we can change the spatial interpolation type from continuous Bezier to linear. And now we'll get what we're after. Those Bezier handles are stripped out. And now it's simply going to move, stop, and then move again. If we want to pause a movement, even if for one additional frame, at the moment what we're going to do is just have a duplicate keyframe. In the future, once we get a little bit more comfort working inside the After Effects animation engine, there are actually other keyframe types that will allow us to hold that movement until a new keyframe is reached. Okay. Pretty neat, huh? Pretty powerful. So we can animate along multiple channels at the exact same time. We're not limited to just animating in one channel. What if I want to have my little thing spin and rotate as I go through my movement? Okay, this is where it gets to be an incredible amount of fun. So if I wanted to animate the rotation properties of my little cube, what would I need to do? What's the first step? Let's revisit the 4 basic steps of animating just about anything inside of After Effects. Step number 1, put your playhead put your playhead when we want the animation to begin. Okay? Now I think given the context of what I'm about to accomplish, I want my cube to begin rotating at the exact same time as it begins its change in location. So I want to put my playhead on frame 1. Okay? Step 2, what is it? You got the stopwatch. Click, click. Start the stopwatch, which automatically produces a playhead for us at this value and wherever our playhead is. Okay? What's step 3? Not yet. That's step 4. Step 3 is the one that everyone misses the first couple times. It's to move our playhead, right? We have to physically advance our playhead to when we want the next part of our animation to take place. So I want to move it over here, right there. And now, Sean, what do? Make a keyframe. And making a change to any one of the values on that channel will automatically create a keyframe for us. Let's just have this rotate 90 degrees. Let's see what we got. And now, woo! Let's do another one. Okay. So I'm going to copy that keyframe. How do I copy a keyframe? Just like we do it over in Microsoft Word. Command C. And pasting it's the same. Command V. Now I have 2 keyframes that have the exact same values. I want to put my playhead right over there and then change the value of the channel to 180. Let's go back to the beginning of the timeline. Bloop, and then it continues its rotation. Yes, sir?
The copy and paste?
Just Command C and Command V. Just a traditional copy and paste. It's nothing too different. All right, this is looking cool. Shoot, we can even scale this thing across all 3 axes if we want, right? Or all 2 axes. I'm going to start the stopwatch and check this out. I'm just going to go to the last set of keyframes, and I'll put my scale channels down to 10%. And now it's just going to globally get smaller across the entire animation. It's even scaling separately from its movement and rotation. So this is the power of the After Effects animation engine. Basically every single channel is animatable, but everything isn't animated, right? There are a lot of channels in here that we're just kind of leaving unanimated. We're only placing keyframes on the channels that we know we want the keyframes or the animation to reside. I'm not changing the opacity, and I'm not changing the anchor point. Let's chat about that anchor point for a second, because this is going to be an important part for us going forward. The anchor point determines the location of rotation and scaling. It's basically the middle of our little guy. Now it's kind of hard to see, but it's this little cross in the center of our layer. That's the anchor point. I can change the location of this anchor point wherever I want. Okay? Let me show you something here real fast. I'm actually going to do this. This is going to be pretty entertaining. I'm going to get rid of all of the keyframes for position and scale. The fastest way to permanently damage your animation and to delete every keyframe on that channel is to hit the stopwatch again. So the stopwatch enables and disables the animation for that channel. Watch what happens to all of my keyframes when I hit the position channel stopwatch. Bloop. They all go away. Now, if I was to hit that stopwatch again, what would happen? Are they going to come back? No. Okay? Yeah. So this is not a toggle on and off, right? Once you hit that stopwatch, poof, they're gone. Okay? This is you can only get them back by hitting undo, and sometimes that's not an option for us. Okay? So be careful. Be careful. This is a permanent off when you hit the stopwatch, so be careful. All right? Oops. All right. So now what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to rotate. I'm going to leave my rotation keyframes as they were. Okay? But now I want you to watch what happens when I change the anchor point's location in reference to the actual shape itself. Let me stop the animation here for a second and grab the actual solid itself, the solid layer. And in the center of my viewer, this little cross is the anchor point. Think of it like as the center point of this object. Okay? Changing the anchor point is easy and is something that we often do inside the world of animation, right? They've even given us a dedicated tool to help us change the location of our center points. And it's this little guy way up here in our toolbar. And this is the only thing that the toolbar's location is something that's going to take a little getting used to. If you're coming from other Adobe apps, Photoshop and Illustrator and even Animate, all the toolbars are vertical and on the sides. Well, here in After Effects, it's horizontal and at the very tippy top of our application's frame. But this tool, this one right here, allows us to interactively change the anchor point. Okay? So go ahead and click on it. And now I can go in and I simply can grab that little cross and move it wherever I want. I'm not going to move it too far away, but I want you to watch very directly what happens to my animation now that I've changed the location of my anchor point. Let's go back to the beginning. Now where is it rotating around? Yeah, it's always going to move, scale, and rotate around the anchor point. So if we offset the anchor point from the center of the object, we're going to create kind of like a hinge effect. Okay? Now, if we wanted to put it back, of course, that same tool will allow us to insert it back in here pretty quickly. If you wanted to get some really good accuracy, you can kind of eyeball it. I'm just kind of getting it real close here. But Pat doesn't do close. Okay, check it out. The developers gave us this lovely feature a couple years ago. They actually gave us a snapping engine. We didn't actually have this for many, 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 many years. I'm an old school After Effects animator. I go all the way back to version 4 of After Effects in the 1998, I think. So I've been working, oh my gosh, I've been animating in After Effects for 20 years. That just hit me like a ton of bricks. That's crazy. So if we turn our snapping engine on, this will allow us to snap to a number of components inside of our scene itself. Okay, so now I can very quickly, it's actually preventing me from snapping because it was pretty much dialed, but I can start to snap it to the corners, snap it in here. So that's a handy dandy little tool for us. Turn it on our snapping engine. I recommend that you turn it on, use it, and then turn it off, because it at times just kind of gets in the way and gives us an undesirable result as we're animating. Okay. So we've talked about how to animate. We've talked about how to adjust our anchor point. We've looked at kind of some simple keyframing ideas. I want us now to transition and start looking at shapes, because for your animation, your lab assignment this week, you're going to be creating a simple little bouncing ball. Now, you certainly could use any sort of artwork that you want for your bouncing ball, but I would recommend that you use the vector shape tools inside of After Effects, because the more experience that we have with them, the better. Let me stop my animation. I'm going to collapse the blue box. I want to just keep it inside the frame. I'll put it over here, and it's just going to spin there for a bit, which is fine. Since I don't have any keyframes that establish its position, I really can drag it anywhere I want inside of my frame, and it will just spin there, which is kind of nice. Okay? But I want to return to my toolbar up at the top of the screen, and this is where we can start to generate vector shapes. Okay? Now, the important distinction here is that we need to ensure that nothing is selected in our timeline. Because if we have something selected in our timeline, the shape creation tools are going to turn into masking tools. And we'll talk more about masking on like week 16. Okay? We're not quite ready for that conversation yet. But for today and for the next couple of weeks, just you got to be really, really careful that nothing is selected down here inside of your timeline. That's a selected layer. Deselecting the layer just requires us to click in the empty part of our timeline's layer stack like that. So going up to our toolbar and activating the shape creation tools, which are these three guys, will allow us to create vector shapes inside of After Effects. The vector engine inside of After Effects is great. It's actually inspired, if not directly ripped out of Adobe Illustrator. Okay? It's quite wonderful. We can actually copy and paste vector paths from one app into another, which is fantastic. Okay? So it's a really robust system. I'm going to create a little sphere. If you left click and hold on this button, here's all the basic tools that we have access to. And of course, I'm going to hit the ellipse tool. Holding down the shift key will allow me to create a perfect vector circle. Okay? Now, working with these vector shapes is a little bit different. And immediately, you can probably get a sense that down in our timeline, we've created a new layer called a shape layer. This is a vector shape layer, so it's always going to look perfect inside of our frame. Okay? I think one of the reasons to do all of our animation in After Effects is the vector engine. It's quite good. It's best in class, in my opinion. When you look at all the other motion graphics and animation packages out there, they don't quite have the robust support for vector shapes that After Effects does. However, working with these shapes at times can be a little bit of a challenge, because really it's a whole nested composition, it's a whole nested layer of elements. Okay? We have the shape layer itself, and then, I'm sorry, I zoomed in on the wrong thing. We have the shape layer itself, and then we have a whole series of paths inside of it. Okay? So it's unhooked. We have a layer and then a path inside that layer. And we can actually have as many paths in one layer as we want, which makes it a very powerful system. More on that in a second. Okay? But if we open up the content section of our shape layer, there it is. There's the ellipse. Okay? You can actually change the name of this. Sometimes just hitting the return key allows you to change the name on anything. So let's call this Pat's circle. There we go. And if we expand the contents of Pat's circle, now we get access to the actual path itself. We can also go in and continue to modify the stroke, which is a fancy word for outline, going around our circle. We can change the fill parameters if we like. Maybe I don't like green. Okay? Maybe I want a nice shade of that. Okay, that's fun. Maybe I don't want to have a stroke at all. I can go in and I can change the stroke width to 0, and now that stroke parameter is gone. Okay. In addition, we can also transform this into a gradient quite quickly. Okay. It's a little difficult to see in this capacity because right now The fill parameter is just giving us fill rules. We can even change the opacity of the fill, which is neat. That's actually kind of cool. But if you wanted to have a gradient, this is where it gets tricky. And it took me a long time to unhook my brain from the timeline. But with that shape layer selected, these parameters up here at the top will allow us to change some pretty big things. Okay? Maybe we don't want to have a solid fill. Maybe by clicking on the blue word fill, maybe we want a linear gradient or a radial gradient. Okay? And then down in our layers palette down here, we can adjust the colors. Okay? We can edit the gradient. We get a really nice, robust gradient editor. This is the slider that determines how the start color. We'll make it, I don't know, light shade of blue. The end color is not going to be black. I don't know, something like that. Why not? And we're out the door. Yes, sir. So you got to make sure that your shape layer, or excuse me, your path is selected. Okay. So this is the path that creates the actual circle itself. With that path selected, we can go back to the top of our frame to our toolbar, and we can change all of the fill parameters just by clicking on the blue word, the stroke. If you take our motions graphics class, Fong will teach you what that little add button does. It kind of opens up a portal into an awesome alternate dimension. I'm not going to go into that today because it's some pretty heavy lifting. You can do some really super robust path operations inside of After Effects. You can even do basic Boolean shapes too. So you can have two paths intersect and do a union, a subtraction different. I mean, it's really kind of neat. Exactly what you'd expect and what you're used to seeing over in Illustrator. Okay? All right. So working with these shape layers can be a little bit of a challenge from time to time, and I want to show you one thing, and this is probably the most important thing that you need to see today. If you're paying attention to one thing when it comes to working with shape layers, you need to look at this. Listen to this, okay? When it comes to working with shape layers, we're working inside of a nested component, okay? We have the layer, okay? And then we have the path itself. I can animate the layer separately from the path, okay? Because keep in mind, this is the cool thing. Let me show you just so you can have a good understanding of what's going on. I can put as many different paths in one layer as I want, right? Right now, shape layer 1 just has the circle path. But check it out. I could put another shape in there. And now I have the Polystar 1 path and Pat's circle path, all under one layer, okay? Now, if I just have the layers selected, okay, these transform controls over here, what do you think they're going to do? If I was to change the rotation angle of the layer, visually what's going to happen? Turn what? Is it going to turn one shape or all the shapes? Yeah, it's going to turn both, okay? Because remember, the two shapes here, the circle and the pentagon, are contents of the layer. They're children of the layer. So if I move the entire layer, both shapes are going to move at the exact same time. Like this. It's kind of hard to see. Yep, there it goes. I was worried that we wouldn't necessarily see it as great with the circle. Okay?
Is there a way to get them to both spin individually?
Yes, absolutely. Okay? So if we want to control each one of them individually, we have to go into each path individually. Okay? So if I wanted to mess with Polystar, for example, I'd open up this guy by clicking on the disclosure arrow, and specifically, we need to select the path. There's really not a whole lot of options in here other than the animation channel. Now with the path selected, check it out, I can grab my tools. You can actually grab the control verts, change the path itself, which is pretty great. Okay? If I wanted to, I could animate the path. Okay? There's the start. I'm going to go forward in time to 1 second, and I'm simply going to move the entirety of the path over here. See how the path changes its shape? Pretty rad. Okay? So we can control either the layer or the path. Okay? Now, the thing that I want you to see is the anchor points. Because the anchor points do a really great job of visualizing the center of an object. With my shape layer selected, I can very clearly see the center point for that layer, right? It's this little crossy thing right there. That's the anchor point, the center for my layer. That's where my objects are going to rotate around. And that's what's going to generate the motion path, okay? So if I grab my layer, move it over here, animate the position of it, the anchor point for the layer is always, always, always going to produce the motion path for me, okay? The little dotted line with the Bezier handles. We're not going to get that anchor point, nor are we going to get that dotted line motion path for the animation of a path itself, okay? Check it out. So if I go back into Polystar 1, yeah, it's going to give you a representation and its own anchor point. You can see that it actually has its own anchor point in there, okay? And if we were to open it up, it's got its own transform section, okay? And it's got the ability to, change its position. However, the thing that we're not going to get, unless they've changed something in this version of After Effects, and I honestly hope that they change it, is that you're not going to get a dedicated motion path. Yeah, still the same. You're not going to get a dedicated motion path line for the movement of just the path. You're only ever going to get a dedicated dotted line with the Bezier handles to change its arcs when you're animating a layer, not a path, okay? So we want to use these shape layers, but we have to be strategic with them. For items that we're going to be very carefully, trying to create a character movement like our bouncing ball, small change needs to be made to our production pipeline. I'm going to get rid of this entire shape layer. And I want to make a new one, okay? Now this time, here's my circle and gradient. Let me get out of this gradient thing and put it back to fill. There we go. All right, there's my circle, right? I'm working on, oops, let me grab the actual path itself. Shoot, you can probably even just turn your snapping engine on a little bit. See if there's nothing really to snap to at the moment. But point being, what we need to do is that we need to ensure that the center of our path is at the exact same location as the center point for the layer. So this is where it gets to 6 to 1, half a dozen to another. You can move the path to the anchor point, or you can move the anchor point to the middle of the path, whatever you want, right, to the middle of the circle. There it is, and my snapping tools moved the anchor point right where I wanted it to. And now the anchor point for the layer is visually in the exact same location as the center of this ellipse. Okay? Now the reason we're doing this is so that we can get a really nice motion path. Okay? Now we have a vector shape. Oops, excuse me. Now we have a vector shape. We can move it anywhere we want on the layer. It's always going to look perfect. If we animate the layer, we're almost always going to get that wonderful motion path, okay, that we're after. We love these motion paths because we can make arcs really easily, okay. However, and this is the part that's neat, maybe we want to do some squash and stretch on this circle, right? We can still animate the contents of the path individually if we wanted to. Let me show you what that looks like. Yeah. The anchor point gets changed with this tool right here. And I always recommend having your snapping engine on when you're changing your anchor point. That way you can get right in the dead center of something. If the anchor point is off even a little bit from the center of the object, you'll get this weird wobble when you rotate because it's not rotating around the dead center. It's offset a little bit from the center. This one. And I think in the most recent version of After Effects, they changed it to the anchor point tool. It used to be called the pan behind tool. And everyone went, what? Same icon. The tooltips are not on at the moment. Okay. So now when we start to look at this system a little bit more directly, I'm putting all of my basic position keyframes on the layer. but I still can go in and animate the path if I wanted, maybe to give some squash and stretch, okay? And to deform the shape. Now, check it out. Let's do this. Let's go in and let's see. It's just moving.
What do you need the path for?
Say again?
What do you need the path for?
The path creates the shape. Remember, these are vector images. They're all mathematically based and created images. And the path creates the image itself. And we can animate that path to change the shape. It doesn't always have to be in the same form as it was when we drew it. So check it out. Now I can go in. Now I'm on, yep, there we go. I'm on the path. Of course, I can make some adjustments here. Oops. Okay. Let me hit undo. There we go. I'm going to animate the path. So you're going to move that keyframe over here. And then right there, I'll change the shape. Boom. Okay. Cool, huh? And this is the power of the After Effects animation system, is that we can animate layers, but we can also animate the contents of the layers by animating the shape's path. Okay? Yeah. Well, it's not a separate path, okay? But remember, it's just two different things, right? The path that creates the shape is a child of the layer. I initially animated the layer, and all the children came along with it, right? But I can also go in and animate the actual path that's responsible for creating the circle. And we do that by drilling down into the content section of our shape layer until we find the shape that's responsible. For me, it's called ellipse 1. And we want to go into the path section, and there's the channel itself, and I'm animating that. So are you looking at the... What tool did you use to, that one? Make another one for me.
Should I get rid of this one?
Now, why does yours say size and position? Now, you have a gradient fill on yours. Is that determining what's showing up? No. Ah, this is what's different. And someone may have turned this off. Is Bezier path on for you? I'm just in the ellipse tool. Bezier path was off and I made another one. Yep, that's it. Yeah, when Bezier path is enabled in your shape creation tools, then it's going to create a shape that you can edit. I can only change the size and the position if Bezier was off. Okay? Watch what happens on that same shape layer. Okay? Now, before I left click and drag out a shape, I'm going to enable Bezier path. Make one more over here. Yeah, and on number 3, check it out. There's the path, and there's the path channel. Okay? So here's what I would like you to do. We're going to recreate the bouncing ball animation that we did at the beginning of the semester, but we're going to use the animation tools in After Effects to produce that animation. One final step, we talked about this last week, but I just want to touch base on this. This animation only exists inside of After Effects at the moment. How do we get it out of After Effects and into a format that we can publish online? Does anyone remember? Yeah, file export. You got it. You got it. So file. Now this takes a good beat, okay? It takes some time. If you look at the doc, you're going to find that it takes a good 15 or 20 seconds for Media Encoder to launch and initialize. It's actually sending a tremendous amount of data from After Effects over into our compression software. So just give it a second. There we go. Now it's working. Media Encoder is a beast. It's a big app. the humongous architecture in its background. So give it some time. And then once it loads, also be patient with it. Far too often I see people trying to hurry through. This is not a fast process. Okay, the app's loaded, but it hasn't loaded the project file yet. I'm just hanging out. This is where I go to the bathroom, check my messages, see what's going on. So you want to go into, and it's still not here yet, don't freak out, it'll show up here in a minute. It's sending all of the animation frames. There it is. We'll come back to you in a second, Media Encoder. So specifically, to answer your question, if you want to get access to the actual raw path data, open up your shape layer, go into the content section. Here's one of my paths. We're going into the path section. Okay? Now, in order for us to animate a path, we need to ensure that when we create it, that Bezier path up here in our tool options is enabled. If this is off, you're only ever going to be able to change the position and the scale. We don't want to change the position and the scale exclusively. We want to actually be able to produce like squash and stretch frames and the illusion of deformation based on the location of those Bezier nodes. Huh? So are you in the ellipse tool or the rectangle tool? All right, real fast, let's just go back over to Media Encoder real quick. Okay. Final thing, we're going to use the H.264 codec preset, so just leave it at the defaults there. But this determines where the animation is saved. And I don't want to save it to this untitled project folder somewhere on my machine. So if you click on the blue link, I'm just going to do Command D to bring up the desktop hotkey and hit save. Then how do I start the actual physical encoding of my animation? Does anyone remember from last week? Hit the green play button. Takes a minute or so just to kind of initialize. It's a pretty short animation, so once it actually starts the compression of the video, just take a beat. There it goes, and we're done. Go to my desktop. Here's the animation. Ta-da! And now it's out of After Effects and in a format that I can share anywhere online. And look at those wonderful circles. They're just so crisp and so clean and so perfect. The vector shape engine inside of After Effects is awesome. Give it a second. Like, you got to give it a good minute, okay? Yeah, it's not immediate. Some folks, they get worried, and they'll send it again. Just give it a good minute. Mine didn't show up for a good 30 seconds or so. Probably even longer than that. All right, so here's what I want you guys to do. We've got about 45 minutes left in class, and we absolutely can bang this out pretty fast, okay? I want you to practice. I don't want you to leave today without a really good understanding of the After Effects animation engine, okay? So if you go to the Week 9 folder, we're going to be recreating the bouncing ball animation that we did at the beginning of the semester, but this time using exclusively the shape animation tools inside of After Effects, okay? So still remember to demonstrate your understanding of arcs, squash and stretch, absolutely look at your timing. Our animation process is not any different. The tools are just different now, right? Now we're using some computer animation system versus doing everything by hand, but the principles are identical. So please make sure you demonstrate to me that you understand these core principles, all right? Now when you're done with this animation, please just, all you need to submit is your MP4, the compressed video file of your finished work to the Dropbox back on Canvas, and life will be good. All right? So you get to it. You guys can probably knock this out in the next 45 minutes. And then here in a couple minutes, we'll start talking about our homework. Let's get to work.